Welcome to the Not in the Job Description podcast. I'm Scott McLaughlin.
And I'm Chris Kiernan.
Look at all the people around you. They may seem very different, but they all have something very much in common. Work. Most people have had a history of roles that's taken them to their current job.
Everybody has a story about their job and how they got there. We'll explore funny, gross, embarrassing, scary, and sometimes almost unbelievable stories that people have experienced at their jobs. So enjoy the conversations as people share things about their jobs that were not in the job description.
On today's show, we talked to Bev, who was a flight attendant, or, correct me if I'm wrong, Bev, stewardess?
Air Hostess.
Air Hostess. Welcome.
Hi, Bev.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Thanks for joining us. I'm excited to talk today about this because, you know, I probably didn't take my first plane flight until I was really, really young. Don't remember anything of it. And then in high school, I took a flight or two. But outside of that, I didn't have a lot to go off of. Things have changed a lot in that time frame. I understand, you know, in my opinion, the golden age of air travel was probably when you worked there, when, you know, in the past, people would actually get dressed up to get on planes. Well, that isn't the case today.
No. Suit and ties. Ladies were all dressed up to the T's. Certainly the late 70s, early 80s were the heyday of flying. And honestly, I just feel super honored to have been a part of it.
Well, I've got to ask about this because it seems like the flight attendant kind of role, you know, it used to be there was a lot of customer service behind it. Anymore now, it just feels like they put that guise of safety over everything. So they don't budge whatsoever. In fact, the last flight I was on, I believe they have little reminders like be nice to the staff, because, you know, and it's like, be nice to the staff. Why do we even have to say that, first off? And secondly, everything just seems to be like, well, we can't do that because of either COVID or safety or fill in the blank.
Yes, now that's something that is super foreign to me, thinking back to those days. Yeah, we just didn't have that kind of stuff. But on the flip side, we did have a really, really high standard to uphold and super strict.
Well, let me ask you, before we even get into the details of that, how did you get this job? Like, how did you read an ad in the paper looking for it? Like, how did this happen?
Yeah, that's a good question, Scott. It started out as a dare. And it was a friend of mine and myself. We thought, you know, it's not an easy job to get. The standard was extremely high back then. And so the criteria was a lot. And so we dared to apply and see how it went. And so we did. So in the January of 1979, we applied thinking nothing is going to come of it. And I would say about 2 to 3 months later, I did hear back from them to say, right, we do need you now to come, and there will be a lot of girls that had applied at that point, because when I arrived in this conference room, there must have been about 100 girls there. And this was like almost I don't know how to word it here, but it was a clearing out, you know.
Right.
So it was, you had to be weighed, you had to be measured, and you know, just a general look at you to say, okay, we will now move forward from here to the next step. So I did see a lot of girls leaving, and, you know, now finding out what that criteria was, you had to be a certain height, you had to be a certain weight, you had to have a certain look.
Right.
And a lot of girls never came back for the next phase.
So let me ask you, Bev, you indicated there were all kinds of young women or young girls there. Any men in this kind of job?
Yeah, there were definitely men, but not at that particular time. I don't think I met any young men at that time, but I definitely did when I arrived to do the course, this intensive 9-week course. And I then got to meet some other flight attendants, young men, women.
And at the time, where did you live at the time? Were you here where we are now, or?
At that time, we all had to be decentralized to one town, and it wasn't my hometown.
Okay.
So it was a matter of picking up and moving to a city, which was Johannesburg, and that's where we had to live and work.
And was this a regional airline to there, or was it a national airline?
We were regional as well as international. I know that SAA hasn't been in international skies now for about 11 years.
Okay.
But I think they've just launched their very first overseas flight again. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, if you couldn't tell, Bev is not from the Appalachian Mountains of Ohio, just so you know. She does have a bit of a South African accent that she just can't get rid of.
I've tried and tried. Oh, my gosh. Yeah, so...
You know, when I read a little bit about what I consider that golden age of travel, when people actually would put on a suit and tie to travel, I did a little bit of research, and there's something called cntraveler.com where they talk about this time frame. And one of these stories, I was wondering if you could vouch for it or not, but I thought it was kind of interesting. It's a little bit before your time, Bev, but a woman named Victoria Clark, who is 78, lives in Eugene, Oregon. She was a flight attendant for Continental Airlines between 1960 in 1963, and she was based in Albuquerque, Los Angeles, and Seattle. And this just blows my mind. She said, when I started, there were usually around 600 applicants for 20 positions, so it was quite competitive. There was a written, verbal, and physical exam, including a full pelvic exam to make sure you hadn't had children or were pregnant. We knew our wings would be clipped when we turned 23 or 33. Oleg Cassini designed our uniforms, and there were two versions. The winter uniform, which was navy with red slips, and the summer dresses were light beige. We had to wear pastel slips underneath those so that when you reached up in the cabin, the slip would show. At that time, women's underwear only came in white or black, so they would use a dye to create the pastel colors. Can you imagine an airline caring that much about their... I mean, yeah, they were uniforms, but... It's worse than any Catholic school uniform that I've seen.
Go back to the pelvic exam. That was intriguing.
Seems a little intrusive.
That
for
was a little
for
intrusive.
a job.
No, I don't think I did not have to go through any pelvic exam, but the entire application took from January until September. That's how long this process was, and as I was saying, Scott, the first time I got to meet all these ladies, coming in to be weighed and measured and just given the once over, out of all of those ladies, and to put a feather in my cap, I was the only one.
Wow.
The only one coming out of Durban, which was my hometown, to actually make it. And this all started as a dare. And here I was now being congratulated and big pat on the back. You're the only one. And here you go, off you go.
How many people were in this dare?
3 of us, of which 2 are still on my Facebook. And we talk about it.
I wonder if they think they won or they lost, because, I mean, certainly it's a pretty big, it's a big thing to be a flight attendant. Not everyone can do it, but I mean, there had to be some rough times too, right?
There were indeed. I mean, the training itself, as I said, was 9 weeks long. The medicals that you go through are pretty intensive. And during that medical, I mean, 2 girls were found out to have cardiac issues.
Wow.
And so, they were sent home immediately. And I had to think long and hard before I signed that contract. I don't think I realized what I was in for. But I would say about 2 weeks into the course, I thought to myself, what have I done? I signed the dotted line, and here I am. And you just have to go with it,
So what do you learn now I get there's all kinds of things you can learn, but 9 weeks? I feel like at 9 weeks training about anything, you'd run out of stuff to talk about.
Oh my gosh, you would have thought, but every day there was something. You would start off, they would introduce you to the world of flying and being an air hostess and what it means to be an air hostess. You're not just an air hostess, you are an ambassador for your country. And you learn about catering, you learn about air safety and security. The catering is pretty intensive. You have to know, your foodstuffs and serving. That was a big thing, serving tea and coffee, holding 2 cups in one hand and, pouring a third while it's sitting on your cart. I mean, it's like a juggling trick.
How much of it was a feat to get through because you need to have some dexterity versus how much of it was, okay, this is the cadence of how you must do things because this is how, like I went through an entire class back when I was in this management program a million years ago where we spent 4 full days and we talked about etiquette at the table. And I learned things that I only used in that class because the things that they taught were very rules based. Yes. And, if you're eating with people from the Middle East and you're presented sheep eye, here's how you eat it. I've never had to deal with any of this, but how much of it was dexterity, like you have to be able to do this versus this is how things should be done?
Yes. So there's a lot of fluff, with any kind of studies. If you go to college, there's those subjects. It's just fluff. It's just filler.
Yeah.
But for the most part, Scott, I want to tell you that I think everything that we learned was pretty important. It was crucial that we knew most of the stuff. I think the whole idea is, they create this image, and that training is to make sure that when they pop you out at the end, that you epitomize that image.
Sure.
And so, the course was long. It was intensive. It got down to crunch time near the end where you get fitted for your uniforms. And, it's not just pulling a uniform off the rack and saying, here you go, doll, this is yours. It's fitted. And you weigh a certain amount and your uniform is fitted to your size.
Wow.
And so I did want to bring something up to you. I found a letter that was sent to an air hostess back in 1973. And she had gone over 1.5 kgs on the weight thing. And she was given 2 weeks to lose that weight. And I mean, we're talking 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds. But she was grounded until 2 weeks later when she would be reevaluated and weighed to make sure she lost that weight. That's how strict it was. Every flight we went on, we went through inspection with senior hosties, and they would check everything. Your nylons were not allowed to have any catches. The heels of your shoes weren't to be worn down. No scuffs. Your nails had to be manicured. You had to wear earrings if your ears were pierced, and again there were stipulations with that. Only studs. And your hair had to be up if it was a certain length. It was not to touch your shoulders. And your makeup had to be perfect. So yes, this is all part of the training.
That's just crazy. I can't imagine. Well, first of all, Chris eats 2.5 pounds at lunch. So I think that's one part to think about. He just skipped lunch and he's right back in. Right. He's right back in.
I mean, how lucky is it? It just doesn't work that way with us women.
It doesn't. And especially when you're probably starting where they're like starving these young girls anyway, just to have a certain look.
Should have on the first day had about 3 pounds of lead in your pocket to set the baseline, and then you could say,
exactly.
And you're like, look, I'm right where I was when I started.
Right, exactly. I know. No, it was all about image, and we certainly did back then present an image.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that goes to the whole glamorous thing, right? That's why people were dressing up. They kind of expected a certain look and treatment and
how times have changed.
Times definitely have changed. Sure. It's nothing like it used to be. It was a real privilege. And it was, I felt, a part of something. I really did feel a part of something. And I know that the application and the course that I did, it was brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had to go to an interview, and it was a panel of 3 senior hosties. And you're standing in front of these 3 women, and they are just shooting questions at you. You have to know your geography. they are looking at the way you stand, the way you talk. They're looking at your nails. They are looking at the outfit you're wearing, at your hair. In fact, my hair came up. They said, you know, you have this long hair, but it was a Farrah Fawcett haircut.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
Heck
it
yeah, it
was
was.
fly away. And they said,
I got to get a picture of that back in the day. I'm thinking serious hottie. Absolutely.
yeah, well, Scott, I think when I look back now, it was rather cute. But, you know,
Isn't it easy when we all look back when we were younger and go,
yeah.
damn, we were much better
I
looking.
know, right?
Man.
Just didn't have the wisdom, though.
Right.
Right?
And I didn't have the looks, but I get what you're saying.
I don't know. I think I've just gotten better as I've gotten older.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
you're
just
like
me.
an
I don't
old
know.
From your
wine.
starting point, though,
Yeah,
Chris.
like
Yeah,
a good
no,
wine,
nowhere to go
Chris.
but up.
Right. Right.
Yeah, no, it was an end of an era there for sure. It's not like that any longer.
So anything during your training that you look back on and you just kind of cringe at, like, oh man, I totally blew that. I'm surprised I even got the job.
I think there were many times when my confidence took a knock because I would look at some of the other girls and go, you know, you're just made to do this. I have to work at this, you know. And then, you know, those girls would look at me and go, but, you know, Bev, you've got everything going for you. I mean, you don't even have to try that hard. But I was trying really, really hard.
Right.
Yeah, I kind of struggled with in the beginning with the whole teacup issue. You know, I eventually mastered it. I absolutely had to master it because I was trying to get on the overseas run.
Yeah.
And in order to get on the overseas run, you will be evaluated. And one of the big things was you had to hold 2 cups and saucers, and they're plastic, for crying out loud. So they're not very stable, and you're pouring hot tea and coffee, and then you've got one sitting on the cart as well. And that took a while to master. But during the course, I'm trying to think if there was anything that I felt totally blew it. It's been a while, Chris. So
Right.
I
I
might
mean, I'm
very
sure-
well have done something that probably thought, oh, God.
Just like anytime you're in a competition with a bunch of people, I'm sure everybody feels like, oh gosh,
Yeah.
I'm going to have a hard time with, you know, that person seems like they know what they're doing. But in my experience, and I've hired a lot of people, I'll take somebody who is trying and wants it over
Right.
somebody who, you know, naturally has some talent and doesn't seem to care. I'll take that
Right.
person trying every single time.
Well, you know, we did have some girls that had gotten through the entire interview process. They scored on the medical. And then when it came to the course, we had to learn a 3rd language. So we were already bilingual. So we have 2 home languages, and that's English and Afrikaans. But we had to learn a 3rd language. And so we were all divvied up, and I landed on French. And
So you didn't have a choice. They just said, okay, you're going to go
that's
learn
right.
French.
This is what they did. They
Okay.
said 10 girls over there, 10 girls over there, and there were different languages. So I got French, and I thought, oh no, I'm not going to be able to cut this. I can't just, you know,
Well, you
slip
didn't have to
into
give
this.
lectures in French. I mean, you just had to know some
Well-
specifics, right? Or did they expect you to be fluent?
They expect you to be fluent
Oh my
in
God.
airline French.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and you had to have there's a pass mark. There was an 80% pass mark on all other subjects, and French was 75. And I thought, that's high. I've never spoken French in my life.
Yeah.
But they teach you. And then I figured it out. I actually would translate from English to Afrikaans, and then from Afrikaans to French.
I guess that's one
And,
way to
you
do
know,
it, right?
It worked. It worked
Yeah.
for me. And, you know, I was told when you're reading your French announcements or you're reading French to me, you sound so French. But when I was trying to hold a conversation, well, that was a whole different
Oh,
story.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You just open the door to someone to totally embarrass you because you have no idea what they're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, Chris, was one of the things that I thought, oh, I've messed up.
Right.
And 2 girls were told that to leave. They did not pass French. They didn't think they would be, you know, told to leave. They thought they could just slide
Fake
right
it.
in. But
Yeah.
they failed French, and it was rough. That was pretty rough because they'd been through all of this intensive learning, and now they failed French, and it was bye-bye, you're going home now.
Wow, I flunked Spanish twice. There's no way I'm doing French just on a job application. I'm done. Not that I would have made it past the first day anyway. But now I have to ask, though, because I know the difference between even when I was a younger person getting on the plane and the flight attendants and the customer service attitude, all that shit seems to be gone now. It seems like the planes today are like the Greyhound bus of the sky. And, since I said Greyhound, there's also dogs on the plane. So It truly is the Greyhound bus with dogs, and it's somewhere between the Jerry Springer show and a Greyhound bus anymore.
Absolutely, Scott. It's not a patch on what flying used to be. The professionalism that was involved. I mean, I can't bash everybody because, I fly Southwest mostly. And for the most part, they try. They do try. And we have fun on their flights. But yeah, I think that aspect of professionalism is no longer,
Oh, right.
Well, and I think unfortunately some of it is because the customers aren't as
Correct.
nice either, right? Customers have turned into jerks.
Correct.
So that's also forced then, the workers to be a little bit jerky back.
That's right, Chris. But it is quite good to see in some cases, some of these passengers have had to disembark because of their bad behavior.
Yeah.
And that happened back then too. There were passengers who just became unruly in certain situations. They became abusive. I had that happen a couple of times. Again, really hard to maintain professionalism when you're being sworn at or drinks thrown at you. But there have been incidents where, and even on one of my flights overseas, where a passenger was put off at the next port. And
but
that wasn't his destination.
Wouldn't you just take off your glove and slap them with it and say, "Good day, sir," and then turn your back on them?
Well, I guess it was there in my mind, in the forefront of my mind, Scott, trust me. But yes, we stopped all service, all bar service to him in this instance. But
shit, a plane nowadays will turn into a battle royale.
Yes.
Do you find yourself when you're a passenger now, are you more critical?
Is the bar high?
Because you've been in that role, or are you a little bit more forgiving because you understand kind of what they're going through?
I want to tell you, Chris, it's a big difference between domestic flights and overseas flights. Domestic, it's whatever goes these days. I'll get on the plane and, Brad and I will talk about it, and you'll say, I bet you were a lot more professional than this, just throwing bags of, things.
Right.
I said, oh yeah, we'd be walking up and down this aisle serving, a bar service, a meal service, and tea and coffee. But the overseas, I think my expectations do go up for sure. And I do want to say, like in recent years when I have flown overseas, that Emirates has got to be one of the nicest, the best airlines. I can definitely equate it to how SAA used to be back in the day.
Yeah, I've flown internationally to the Philippines one time, and the little trick that they almost got me on, I thought this was interesting. It just so happened that I had a bunch of my employees I sent ahead of me.
Right.
And they told me, don't fall for this trick, because we did. And that was, they'll offer to upgrade you from business to first class. And I'm like, well, that doesn't seem like a very smart trick on their part. Well, we were on one of those monstrous double-decker planes.
Yeah.
First class was at the very front of the nose cone.
Correct.
And although you could be completely prone, completely laid down, it was so freaking loud from the wind shear off of the front of that plane that I guess it was just impossible to sleep. So I stayed where I was in business class. Outside of that, I mean, the most I ever fly is like from Ohio to Arizona a few times a year. And it's funny. It seems like everything is on lockdown. Like, you want a meal? We don't have them. We can give you some crackers and cheese if you want to pay $20. There's nothing out there. Please tell me of the old days. What was it like getting ready to host people in first class? Like, what did you provide them? Were you actually making meals on this plane, or was it the Swanson frozen dinner heated up?
Well, I will tell you that I only ever worked in first class once because I was a junior Air Hostess. And first class is normally reserved for senior staff, crew members. But the one time I did get to work in the first class, it was so very different.
Really?
You are eating off china plates.
Yeah.
You're drinking out of glasses, silverware, real silverware, and food that is presented on a platter. So none of this throwing a tray down onto your tray and having your little pieces of chicken and mashed potato and veggies.
And God forbid you're like me, you're at the back of the plane and you have 3 options, but there's only one left. Right. And then they have the nerve to go, which one would you like? And I go, oh my gosh, please, the chicken. Oh, well, we only have meatloaf left. Well, then why'd you ask?
That happens.
They were hoping to go, I was going to say meatloaf, and they would say, oh, you got the last one.
I think when it comes to the catering, from what I recall, if you require a vegetarian as opposed to the regular, run-of-the-mill meal, you can put in a request. And so that's all part of the training as well. You have to know which bins are for which flight.
Right.
And so, yes, you've got bins for your return flight from overseas.
Yeah.
And your bins go in there. So, but yeah, you can put in a request.
So tell me, we've gone from the golden age of flying, where it was really kind of an event to go. Now we've talked about this is the Greyhound bus in the sky. Any situations? I know you spoke just briefly about it, but any inappropriate situations with either pilots or customers? Have you ever had anybody try to join the Mile High Club on one of your flights?
Yeah, I kind of expected that question to come up tonight.
Besides you and Brad, anybody else?
Well, I've never had the privilege of joining the Mile High Club because we don't have sex on the job. But
you're in the wrong job. But go on.
That was a whole other episode.
Right. I was going to say this is going to be a whole new episode, Scott, because we could talk till the cows come home about this. But yes, it's a big thing. Well, it was a big thing back then. How people would try and join this Mile High Club. Certainly not the cabin crew. Although, having said that, there were cabin crew that were caught.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. And it was just not worth it. I mean, they just started
That's not
dating.
a slap on the wrist there, right?
No,
that's it, you're done.
No, when we arrived at our destination, they were done. They were sent right back and fired on the spot. But certainly lots of propositions, Scott. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. I had a lot of male attention. A lot of them, trying to join that Mile High Club. But
yeah.
I mean, there is no time for that nonsense, honestly. But
you can't blame them for trying, Beth.
No, I
Come
know.
on.
I got to give it to them. But I must tell you that there's got to be something in an aeroplane. The rear of an aeroplane, I think there's like movement, because most of the shenanigans seem to happen at the back of the aeroplane.
I think it's just, hey, we're kind of off the path where all the people are, so I think that's part of it.
Could be. And we do have some strict rules and restrictions. You are not allowed to sleep on the floor of an airplane. Mm-hmm. But I mean, we would just, look past that at times, unless there's 2 people on the floor together under a blanket. And then we have to say, look, this is not
we know
cool.
what's going on.
We know what you're doing. One of you have to get up and sleep on the plane seat. So I mean, we have children on board as well, so we have to be conscious of that. But we've had to bang on a couple of toilet doors and say,
let's go.
Yeah,
let's
all
go.
of you out.
Yeah.
It was funny. I don't know what this says about me. Actually, I do know what it says about me, and it's not good. My wife and I, who I've tried to talk into the Mile High Club, she's not having it.
No.
We were in Graceland about a month ago, and we got on the Lisa Marie, Elvis's plane.
Yeah.
And in the very back of it, there's a great big bed. And I looked at Kim and I said, Elvis got busy on this.
Yes.
And she's like, well, I would assume. I mean, it's his plane. And I was like, there's cameras here, but nobody's looking. She wasn't having it there either.
Well,
she wouldn't
no.
even deface Elvis's bed.
No. Well, you're not Elvis, are you?
Not even close.
Nope.
So let me ask you this. All this time, you get all this safety training. Did you ever run across any close calls from a safety standpoint?
Yes, I had a couple of close calls, but nothing, nothing serious. I think I had one serious emergency coming out of Frankfurt in Germany. We were picking up this flight and taking it on to Zurich and Vienna, and the plane developed an issue as it was coming into land at Frankfurt. And so we saw this plane overshoot the runway, circle, and come back again for a second try, and it landed. Well, we took that flight over. And so what happened in that emergency, people were aware on the plane that something was up, and they had redistributed a few passengers and taken all their sharp objects off and got them prepared, for this emergency landing. And so we took this flight over. People were just super stressed out. People were still crying because they were pretty scared. We did have an incident on that plane with a passenger. He was obviously inebriated and obviously scared, and so he lashed out at the airline and lashed out at whoever he could. But coming into land in Vienna, once again, we were preparing for an emergency, and I thought, oh gosh, I thought they'd fixed the problem back in Frankfurt, but okay, here we go. And we all had to pull out our emergency cards. And of course, the passengers see that. We try and be as discreet as possible. But the minute they see you pulling out these pink cards, they know something's up.
Sure.
And immediately you could sense, there's just, the cabin goes really quiet. You see heads bobbing. They're all watching you.
Yeah.
Somebody starts to whimper and cry, and then someone else starts to scream and yell. And yes, we were coming into land, and I looked out the window, and I could see the emergency vehicles all lined up alongside
chasing you.
Oh my gosh, and here is sleet and snow, and we're about to land. But we had a fantastic pilot.
That's good.
He was brilliant. So, for a second I thought, I'm never going to see my family again.
That's awful.
Yeah.
You should have told that guy who was being disruptive that he should save his energy. He's going to need it to run out of the fire in a few minutes.
Exactly.
Right.
And you think, it's nothing too serious. It's just the front gear.
Yeah.
It's not registering. It's not, clicking or locking in. But it could be if that front landing gear doesn't lock in and it doesn't, support the plane. A lot can happen. But it was very, it was a bit scary seeing, the cabin light up with all the red lights and people waiting for us to.
As soon as you see the flight attendant and their eyes are big, it's time to get a little serious.
Yeah, you see, and that's all part of the training too, Scott.
Yeah.
Like, we have to be prepared for
I think you guys failed that day, though. I think people were pretty upset.
They were pretty upset. Yeah, nobody wanted to deal with it for a second time. That is for sure. Coming into Frankfurt, they dealt with it once, and they were pretty terrified. But our track record with South African Airways was pretty good, except for the one in 1987. One of our planes did go down in a ditching situation, and I knew a couple of the crew members.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, the cockpit crew and as well as cabin crew. One girl was actually in my class that perished in that air crash. But all in all, we had pretty good track record.
Yeah, odds are usually pretty good with air travel.
Yes, yeah.
Now, this was also during a time maybe when hijackings were a little bit more prevalent than now. Were you ever in a situation, obviously I don't think you were ever hijacked, but were you ever on a flight where you're kind of looking at somebody sideways like, oh, this guy seems like this could be trouble?
Yes.
Had to be part of the training, right?
Oh, yes,
just like
definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, especially during that time, and especially in South Africa. Rhodesia was, now Zimbabwe, and, I guess... terrorism has been around a lot longer than we think. But yes, there was a gentleman that got onto one of my flights. I wasn't at that section, but I heard the commotion, and he threatened. He said he had a bomb in his bag. And I heard the steward, flight attendant, the male flight attendant, say, that is not something we joke about, sir. So if you're kidding, you best own up about it right now. He said, no, I'm not kidding. I've got a bomb in my bag.
Were you guys in the air at this time?
Gosh, no. We had closed the doors. We were ready for takeoff, and this guy decides he's going to say this silly thing. Well, we had to go all the way back to the gate. the police came on board and escorted. And of course, then he's performing, saying, "No, I was just kidding. I was just kidding." Well, no.
That's
We
the worst
don't
joke I've ever heard.
kid about stuff like that, you know. So, that was the only sort of bombing threat that I ever had.
Now, you know, of course, there were hijackings back in the day. Hell, there were for quite some time, even up to 9/11. But I understand that airport security wasn't like it is today. And in reading about just how things worked back in the 70s and 80s, there were many people who said it wasn't completely uncommon that somebody would just run on your plane at the last minute. Like sometimes they weren't even ticketed, but they were in the airport. They'd made it past security. Maybe they got off another flight, and that they would get on the plane. And one lady even wrote, on a flight from New York to Dublin, after takeoff, a passenger rang the call bell and asked why the TV screen said we were crossing the Atlantic. He was supposed to be on a flight going to Orlando, and he ended up on the wrong plane.
Oh my gosh. No, I can't say I ever experienced that. I think they were pretty strict about making sure anybody that got onto the plane had boarding passes. But I have heard of that, Scott.
Yeah, it seems like, you know, at least a few things I read. It was like going to the theater when I was little. You'd finish one movie, just go to the other one.
The next one. Yes.
Just travel anywhere that any plane's taken. Yeah.
Right. No, the security definitely wasn't anything like it is today. On the international, it was. I mean, when you're flying in and out of a country, sure, you do have to go through customs. But on the domestic, no, it was pretty much just pick up your bags and walk on.
So how long did you do this job?
3 years.
What was the best part?
Oh, I would say flying overseas to me was the best part. It was an opportunity I probably would never have had. So getting to fly overseas and getting paid to fly overseas and staying in great hotels. And
I hope you went to France since you learned the language.
Yes, right. And I mean, there's also Mauritius. So if you're flying to London, you're flying via Mauritius, you need to be able to speak French. And I got very smart with that too, Scott. Because, when I had to converse in French, I was not that good. And the French take umbrance. They do.
Yeah.
They do not like you to slaughter their language or butcher it. And I quickly figured out that if I spoke to them in Afrikaans, they would respond in English. And then I know they can speak English, so I will respond in English.
Didn't hurt that you're hot. I'm just saying right now. Yeah, it did not hurt at all.
Oh, gosh, yeah. I did. It was a fun time. It was good.
So
Good
I got the
times.
best from you. What about the worst part of the 3 years?
I would say those flights in the beginning when I got onto the overseas. I worked really hard to get onto the overseas. I had a couple of letters of recommendation. I really, truly did work hard to get, especially balancing those two.
That's right.
and
Those
sauces,
plastics cups, yeah.
And those flights in the beginning were extremely long, and I was not used to flying that long, so I got really tired.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a tiredness, and I think I can relate to that tiredness now, and Kim will understand as well, as when you have that first newborn. That tiredness, you don't think you're ever going to
Like
be
a constant jet lag.
Oh my gosh, yes. Even though you take 2 hours break and you get to sleep for 2 hours in the crew rest, it's when you get up and you have to put your makeup on again. You've got to put a fresh shirt on and get back out there and serve your passengers. I just remember being so tired that I grabbed 3 of those bins that your meals come in.
Yeah.
And I just curled up with a blanket. I couldn't cope. I was so tired. But you do get accustomed to it. They try not to have you fly. You've got certain hours to fly. And so they won't put you on a flight to New York and then straight after that a flight to Sydney in Australia. You'll do a couple of flights to Europe in between. But they're very cognitive of that, make sure you don't fly over your hours.
Those all seem like long days to me, but I'll take your word for it.
I know, flying now overseas, I mean, flying back to South Africa, it's really far. And I must tell you, the last 2 hours coming into South Africa, I'm done. Yeah, I'm done. I'm ready to lose my mind.
Look, I was just a passenger on a flight from the Philippines. I couldn't imagine working the plane.
Right.
I'd
Just
rather
forget
work,
it.
you know, Scott, to be
You might be
honest.
right. It might
Yes.
help the time go by. Just to
Definitely.
have a purpose. And
I,
to do
I,
things.
I have said that. I said that last flight that I did to South Africa and sitting as a passenger, I thought, no, I'd rather work this flight.
Right, yeah.
Wow.
Well, this is the time of the episode where I ask Chris, what we learned today?
Yeah, I learned that maybe I need to sit in the back of the plane so I can experience some of those shenanigans.
Yeah, good luck talking Sue into that.
Well, I've already spent that time with Kim back there, so I'm
Fair enough.
That's funny.
Well, at least someone did.
Yes, yes.
And I learned, I've got to be careful with these dares that we do. I got to make this work because this is the first one I've seen that really worked out to a 3-year commitment.
know,
You got to be
right?
careful with that stuff.
I mean, really, a dare, and look where I ended up.
I think it worked out well for you.
Yeah, it really did. I
Great.
enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much, Bev, for joining us today. I'm Scott McLaughlin
I'm Chris Kiernan.
saying we'll see you at work.
Thank you for listening to the Not in the Job Description podcast. If you have a story you'd like to share, or if you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, please let us know by sending us an email with a brief description of your story to stories@notinthejob.com.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more crazy stories, make sure you follow us wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on our social media, including Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Rumble, Instagram, and YouTube.